Oxfordshire-based Clare Nash is an architect, author, mentor, and founder of Clare Nash Architecture. But what really sits underneath her work is a deep curiosity about how we live. Claire has never been someone who simply accepts that things have to be done the way they're always been done. She's a big ideas person, a questioner, and a challenger of the status quo, and someone who quite literally built a life around the idea that we get to design how we live, not just the buildings we live in. Her path hasn't been neat or predictable. Claire lived and worked in Germany, Liechtenstein, travelled alone through places including Papua New Guinea, China, Vietnam, and South America, and came home from a 6-month research trip during a recession with no job, no savings, and no clients. With postcards in local shop windows, a very simple website, and a lot of determination, Claire began building her architecture practice, but from the beginning, she didn't want to create a business that took over her life. She wanted work to fit around real life, not the other way around. That meant building a flexible practice long before flexible work was the norm, partly because she hated commuting, partly because she wanted space to swim, run, garden, and think properly, and later because becoming a mum made that freedom even more important. Today, Claire lives in a beautiful village with her husband and son. She has a large allotment, a garden full of native plants and flowers for wildlife, and loves wild swimming, running, and books. Basically, if there's a choice between sitting in traffic and getting an idea while digging up potatoes, Claire will choose the potatoes. That's what makes her work so interesting. Claire just doesn't think about buildings. She thinks about the life happening inside and around them. The morning coffee, the muddy boots, the garden, the family rhythms, the need for space, quiet, beauty, and breathing room. And what stands out about Claire is she isn't just talking about the designing a better life. She's done it and she helped other people do the same. And perhaps what sums up Claire the best is something she said herself. It's possible to feel rewarded, enjoy your work, and live well too. Claire, welcome to Stories That Sell.
Thank you. Well, that was a really lovely introduction. And yeah, lots of things I was like, oh yeah, I did that. Oh yeah, I said that.
I mean, we were just talking before we started on this podcast, but one I know we've known each other for a little while now. But what I absolutely love about you, I mean, you are an architect, but it's beyond like the buildings that you think because it's all about how you live and what you do and the environment that you're in that can really inspire and change a family rhythm. I mean, how did you get into this kind of architecture, really?
Uh, it's the combination of things. So my dad converted barns. He was a farmer and he saw the opportunity. It's a bit of a long story, but essentially we moved 5 times in 6 years, and I was on building sites a lot of the time. So I was always really comfortable on building sites, but even so, I wanted to be a racing engineer because you get to travel the world. But I did my work experience at Formula 3 team, which was brilliant. I got to see McLaren's testing in my lunch hour and everything, but I realised I'd only get to design a gear stick probably. And I thought I want to design more than just that. And my art teacher at the time was an architect himself before going into art. And yeah, he kind of suggested that would be a good combo for me because I also really like maths at school. Weird, I know, but I did. Maths and art were my favourite subjects, and not so much physics, which I regret doing, but it is useful, really useful. Yeah. And then I got into art college, which actually I didn't want to do. I wanted to go travelling straight away after A levels, but because I got in without what I can't remember what they call it, but when you get in without needing any qualifications to get in, it's like you're just in. That's it.
Unconditional, yeah.
That's it. Unconditional. Yeah. And I was like, oh right, okay, this is my thing then. I better go and do it. And I really like welding, making furniture and graphic design. And then somebody there was teaching interior architecture as well as that course and said I should apply for that. And I was like, oh, good, because I don't think I'll last 7 years for architecture. I'm not very academic. I didn't think I was anyway. Um, and I thought I'd get bored. So I went and did interior architecture in Cardiff. And then I loved that, really loved that. Interior architecture is a funny one because in Europe, everybody knows what it is. There are actual practices in Europe called interior architecture practices. It's nothing to do with cushions and curtains, which is what everyone here thinks. And part of me, like the feminist me, was a bit like, just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I'm doing cushions and curtains. So I got a bit annoyed with that. So I got a job in an architect's, realised there was a ceiling if you stayed just on the interiors kind of side. And then went back to retrain part-time while I was working on building sites and stuff. So that was good. I had
Wow.
both.
So what
Yeah.
so what is interior architecture then for us that for
Yeah,
people
it's
that think it is cushions and curtains?
yeah, it's refurb basically. So like 90% of what an architect does in this country is working on existing buildings, changing the insides and extending a bit around the outsides, but essentially the building stays as it is. Um, yeah, and barn conversions would definitely qualify as interior architecture, which is what I've gone into. Um, so it's thinking more about the spaces within rather than starting from outside. Um, but yeah, but when I switched and went back to do proper architecture, um, I enjoyed both anyway, so it didn't really matter. And it turns out if you really like something, you can be academic. You can last
That,
7 years.
yes, I mean that's 7 years doing a course like that for me. It does sound like it just would be possible, but it's interesting that you went into like you've lent into that creativity side first, like going down the art route, because actually, even though, like you say, there's a lot of maths and there is to some element quite a bit of like design element and being able to work that out. A lot of what you do is actually creativity, isn't it? It's being able to think outside the box and challenge the status quo. Because I guess with a lot of the things that you see them and then you think, well, what's the art of possible here?
Yeah, oh, definitely. And half the creativity is used on just navigating and getting around planning. The planning system in the UK is really tricky, um, partly because we don't have as much space as other countries, but partly also because it's bonkers. I won't go into all the details about why it's bonkers, but it is. So you have to be quite creative about how you approach that. But but also lots of people come to me saying we need an extension, and half the time I can reorganize what they've already got and it works, and then they don't have to spend so much money, or they need a much smaller extension than they thought. Um, so yeah, because I think I've seen so many buildings I've gone into, and you can really tell that the whoever it was just plonked on extra space without thinking about how any of it connects together. So you end up with a really strange building with lots of plonked on bits very randomly, and then there's no flow. You can't see the garden. It, yeah. And then unsurprisingly, people move into those and be like, what are we going to do? What can we do about this?
Yeah,
Yeah, but they bought it because the location's good or something, there's something that got them. There might be some parts of it that they're really attached to because it reminds them of their childhood home, or it's all kinds of nostalgic bits, consciously or not, that's how we choose where we want to live.
yeah.
So it's my job to tap into what those things are because sometimes people aren't even aware that's what they're doing.
No, that's really fascinating. I mean, I know you've worked with so many different people, but how do you go about figuring out what's going to work for a family home? Like what's going to be best for the people and for the family? What's the process you would go through? Because I am in a house that, as you already know, needs work doing to it. And it has been one of those houses, believe it or not, I'm in a semi-detached cottage that was built in 1889, or certainly that's when the first deeds were. That was originally three houses. So
Oh,
it's gone
wow.
from three to two, and they've kind of built bits onto it. So I absolutely understand the flow. Um, and the bits that have been built on have not necessarily been built on correctly. That's a whole other story. But it's really interesting because when you come in and when you move into a house, essentially it's not yours. I mean, I never feel settled in a new house for ages, but I it takes me so long to figure out how to make it work for myself and my family. And then when I mean not just the family that live here, which is basically my husband and the menagerie, but the wider family that like to come stay. It kind of all so
Yeah.
how do you work when you meet people? How do you work out what's going to work for them?
A lot of listening to start with, and sometimes um, I tend to find couples, especially, will have gone through many circular arguments where one person wants this and one person wants that, and they can't come to a conclusion of how to compromise or whether husband's idea actually works or wife's idea actually works. Like there's a whole load of questions in the air, and my job is to listen to all the roots behind it, and then I will have my practical head on as well, because sometimes things aren't possible. And then you can just cross that out, and actually that's a relief because then you stop thinking about it. But yeah, but and there's all like for a really long time there was open plan kitchen, dining, living space. And for some people, they then forgot about the need, like then there's a lot of noise in one room, basically. So we'll always try and find a separate snug so that adults especially could escape from all that noise. Or just if you want to watch TV without the blender going in the background or something, that's useful. And then flexible spaces, because you only have family around at Christmas, like when there's that many of you, or birthday parties or something. It's not every single day. So uh, it's a shame to spend a lot of money designing a really big room that you only really use 3 times a year, because you can also have the use the garden. Um, yeah, so thinking about all those sorts of things. Um, and sometimes I think people tend to think we just need more space, and that's the kind of big driver. And there's more to it than that,
Yeah.
definitely.
I mean, it must be interesting to see how different people live, though, like in the way of what their priorities are. And like you say, I bet you probably end up being able to get people that are on polar opposite ideas of what they think's right to come together and meet in the middle. I mean, that is a challenge in itself half the time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well I do make a joke on my website blurb about how we also solve relationship problems. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's true. It's true.
I can totally understand that because we're all individuals, but we've come to co-live with each other. And actually, your home design is so vital to finding what works for two different people, or at least two different people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then kids come, or dogs, or both. And then it's a
Yeah.
whole different thing. I still remember one of my really early on jobs when I just set up on my own. And I remember feeling quite worried about explaining this to the client, because they told me they were really happy. They're like, oh, we think it'd be best if we put the dogs here and then we have our kitchen here and blah, blah. And I just pointed out to them, you've given your dogs the best view. They're not going to appreciate it. They only want to see you. They don't gaze out the window going, "Oh, that's a lovely plant." They're just different. They're like, and then it all went quiet for about 2 weeks, and I thought, "Oh, I've offended them." And then they came back, "Yep, you're absolutely right. Don't know why we didn't think of that." It's things like that, just the outside view that I have. But sometimes it is a bit nerve-wracking. But
I
yeah,
can
because it is very personal. I mean, when I first go around somebody's house, and I've been in all kinds of different houses, the first thing everybody says is sorry about the mess every single time. And their house is
really.
guaranteed more tidy than mine. Um, yeah, so that's funny. And
It's funny how how people apologize for the space that they're living in when they've got someone
yeah,
coming in designed to help them with their space.
yeah, every time that happens. And I never judge, because I've seen so much, and it's not like my house is pristine and perfect or finished or anything. I mean, it's a busman's holiday, because I never get time to do my own thing. But yeah, and I also really believe everybody should be allowed to live how they want anyway. It's not, I don't force a certain sort of design thing onto people, but I do give them practical feedback on, like, yeah, maybe you put this over here because actually that's a bit more practical when you're working over there, and like the
Yeah.
thoroughfare and people coming past, and you don't want people bumping into you and stuff like that. Um, yeah, rather than saying, "Oh no, that's an awful idea," because it isn't. It's just um, they haven't seen a gazillion different house plans like I have. That's all it is. I've just got lots in my head.
Yeah, I think that is the thing. Your knowledge of what might be possible and how you see things is different from people that spend every single day in it and live in it, and they've got used to the chaos that it brings. And when you get someone with fresh eyes, you're able to see that. Do you think, because obviously before you set up the architecture practice, you went traveling and kind of it sounds like it was an absolutely amazing trip by yourself, which for a lot of people, I love a lone holiday, but traveling by yourself, what do you think that taught you about yourself when it came back to going into business?
I really enjoyed testing myself, like the bravery of some of the places I went to, because I was by myself. Um, and I was nowhere near the beaten track a lot of the time. I remember in China I had to take two trains, one bus, and then walk an hour to get to this cave dwelling settlement, and then stay overnight in a cave dwelling to find out more about it and everything. And I thought it just felt incredible to like push myself to do that. And obviously I don't speak Mandarin. Um, well, most people don't, who are European anyway. And I did really try. I'm actually quite good at languages, but in a whole month of being in China, I only managed to learn like 5 words that I could say convincingly and get the right response. I could understand some numbers and things like that coming back at me, but oh my goodness, it's such a difficult language. Whereas if I'd spent the same time in Italy, I'd have been able to have a short conversation. It's just, yeah, it's mad. But I did really enjoy that. And you
Why
stick
a
out like
cave?
a,
I was going
sorry.
to say, why a cave dwelling?
Oh, because mainly because I was looking at my research was all about it's called vernacular technologies, and vernacular just means how people used to build before architects, before planners, before the modern world, before industry, and they built it just because what. So it's inherently sustainable because they're building with local materials, but also they had it's a lot of work to go and get wood to heat and that kind of thing. So it's naturally efficient. And cave dwellings, even though China particularly has a huge temperature range from winter to summer, but it maintains a constant 16 degrees in a cave dwelling. And then they just
Wow.
top, yeah, because of the earth. So that's fascinating. And then they have this thing called the Kang bed, which is like a central bed that everybody uses it during the day as a sofa as well. And the heat from the stove that they use all the time to make their rice and tea and stuff goes into this Kang bed. So it recirculates all that heat. So it's incredibly sustainable and um, energy efficient. And then I was there looking at the modern versions of those because they had a concern that people in China were moving to concrete apartment blocks, which was so inefficient. And then they had fuel poverty. They were frozen, and it was a really bad situation. So the Xi'an University uh, commissioned and designed and everything a like modern version of these cave dwellings with proper glass instead of rice paper. And there were some upgrades, but it still had the Kang bed, still earth with a little bit of concrete to aid with earthquake proofing. But essentially, it was the same thing. And also, what was really weird, this is the funny bit, is for some reason they still over there revere Chairman Mao, even though he's responsible for millions of deaths, like millions and millions, like the whole Cultural Revolution. And but he plotted the Cultural Revolution in a cave dwelling. So for them, it's really like high status, significantly, culturally significant. It's a bit like, I mean, it's not quite to the same extent, but we love our Cotswold cottages because of nostalgia. It's very similar, apart from there wasn't like a major a dictator plotting a revolution in a Cotswold cottage. But yeah. But I did, and everywhere I went, all over the world, that was the other thing that really got to me was everybody has exactly the same problems. They worry about bills, they worry about their family, um, like little squabbles going on, and all exactly the same. Just yeah,
Really?
and especially because when I was in South America, I learnt Spanish, so I could speak to people properly, and yeah, so I definitely got to the bottom of that. They're all exactly the same. And in China, I used some local English students. They came with me to interview people. So that's how I got it translated. Um, yeah. So and I had to find them on the hoof through then that was through couch surfing. I stayed with somebody through couch surfing. I was like, I'm desperate. I need some people to help. And she helped me, the person I was staying with, to find local students. It's just amazing what people will do
Oh,
wherever you go.
do you know, I think it's the biggest thing, particularly in Britain and the UK, that we don't do is actually just say when we need help. There's a sort of pride element. It's a bit like what you're saying with people that apologize before you've even got in the house for nothing
Yeah,
wrong. We apologize
yeah,
before we say hello so many times. And actually, and it's funny because I always love helping people, and it's never a chore for me to help others. That is the one thing I always say. But I get really upset when people don't ask for help that clearly need it. That said, I wouldn't ask for help myself very easily. So it's amazing when it's on the other foot of actually people, and particularly in China, I think, because I've been there before. And the one thing that really stood out to me is how much they look after each other in their community. They care and all of that caring stuff. And I think we do that here, but we're just afraid to ask for that help sometimes. So
yeah.
that's really
Oh, definitely.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. And the new versions of those cave dwellings, people love them, really love them, and there's no more fuel poverty. So they're planning to roll that out. In fact, they're already doing it everywhere. Things happen very quickly in China, unlike here.
Yes, it's a different world. Uh,
Yeah.
Interestingly, because I know you've got a love of garden, so every time I'm in my garden and my knowledge of gardening, I do have some knowledge, I will say. I am not a consistent gardener by any means, although I did put my tomato plants in my Uncle Bob at the weekend. So that was the one job I did do. Um, but you also kind of do a lot of work around designing gardens and you have your allotment. What is it about like the design of a garden? Because it's quite different from designing a building, but they're very much interlinked, aren't they? But what do you get from being in that sort of natural environment?
I've always loved gardening. Well, at least since I probably got into it when I was 25, when it was really uncool to do that. And I remember my brother-in-law at the time, well, future brother-in-law, saying that I was 25 going on 50. Because I was. I watched Gardener's
Oh,
World every week.
do you know, Claire? I will tell you this story because it's hilarious. But one of my friends who no longer lives in this country, he married an Australian, so they now live in Australia. He used to work for Mr. Fothergill Seeds, so he was my
Oh,
seed supplier. And but he moved to Australia like, oh gosh, it must have been about 15 years ago. And he used to literally he did that kind of thing. I used to get a whole load of seeds, so I got into
oh,
gardening around the same age because he just come in and do you want some seeds? And I'm like sure. And so,
yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't call it uncool. I was there with you.
Yeah. I became obsessed with it. And I think really it started from my future mother-in-law. She sent me some homegrown courgettes, and I was like, I couldn't believe how much better they tasted. And we'd just moved to a house with a garden. We were still renting, and I'd left. We'd left our flat only because I wanted a garden, and it had a greenhouse in it. So I thought, oh, I'll try some things. And then, yeah. Anyway, so that's when I got the bug. And then I got an allotment when I came back, and I'd lost my job. I stayed with my husband's parents. We both did for a bit until I could get freelance work. And they found me an allotment. And so that's what I did. Like I was either job searching or I was on my allotment growing flowers and veg, flowers for my future wedding.
Oh, I
So
love that.
yeah, it was really good. Uh, yeah. And then, yeah, I've just loved it ever since. I find it gives me a lot of therapy. I didn't know that at the time, but I found it it's so reassuring. You plant something and then it grows, and then the seasons change, and there's always something to look forward to in the garden. And when I sit here and I've got a nice view out there that's always changing. It's like a piece of art. And then I also love the fact that I can change things whenever I like. So I'm quite an impatient person, and buildings, you have to be very sure of yourself. Like it has to be perfect because there's no moving a steel what column once it's in, or at least without an humongous cost. Um, but if I want to move a tree, literally just go out there and move it. It's not, so I can just completely change my mind and do run lots of experiments and see lots of different things whenever I like. That's what I like about it. Um, all those things. And then but designing a garden, obviously I don't change my mind loads when I'm doing it for a client, but all my experiments that I do on my own garden pay off and then I put them into other people's. Um, yeah. But yeah, that came out of COVID. That was a COVID pivot, in fact, because I've just lost half my workload, because lots of people's businesses just stopped and all kinds of things happened in the background. And I was really stressed out anyway because it was very unflexi furlough at that point. So everybody
Yeah.
was either bored, stupid, or super stressed. And guess which one I was? um,
It
yeah,
was definitely a challenge
it
from a
was.
owning a business point of view. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it was not fun. But I realised that people were looking at their gardens, not knowing what to do with them. The garden centres were open, and I thought, well, I'd always held myself back, even though I'd been designing gardens for clients before. It just naturally followed on from the architecture work, but I didn't bother advertising it separately. I just like, oh no, I'll be taking work away from proper garden designers. Like, what a weird block. Um, but yeah, because COVID just shook everything up, I thought, sod it, I'm going to put it out there. What's the worst that can happen? And then I got such good feedback, because that's the other benefit. Gardening is quite quick if you're not starting from scratch. You can just go out, plonk, dig some things up, get a builder in, put a slab down, raise beds, it's done. And then you get really quick feedback. Whereas I'm waiting for years sometimes for feedback from my build projects. So I was like, right, that's the thing. I'm going to do it. Um, yeah, and I've done it ever since. And then it's led into other things that I do with farmers about and landowners about biodiversity net gain, which is all to do with if you build something, you put back 10% better
Yeah.
than what you took away. Um, yeah, lots of things it's led to.
I mean, there's a real natural kind of like, obviously, from what you've kind of from your travels and understanding that sustainability side of it. But obviously, I know you do a lot of gardening for wildlife as well, and that kind of biodiversity and that sustainability and looking at us in more of an ecosystem. But do you find that people are looking for more sustainable ways to live much more now, particularly with obviously the financial side of the world as it is?
Yeah, people definitely want to be self-sufficient. They don't want to be worrying about oil prices changing. And I definitely see that for people who are heading into retirement, that's even more of an issue because they want fixed or no bills. They don't want yeah, because obviously if you stop earning, you can't just out earn the bills going up. So yeah, that's a big part of our work is making homes either through retrofit, which is just means putting in insulation and renewables to reduce your energy bills in existing houses, or with a new build, we'll build almost passive house.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah, and then they know. I mean, it's like they've been building on the continent for, oh, I don't know, really long time, like 30 years probably, even longer. Um, because over there they tend to build later, um, and they expect their grandchildren, their great grandchildren, and so on to live in it. It's just a completely different mindset, um,
Yeah.
which I find very frustrating about here.
Yeah, well, it's true, isn't it? Because particularly in Europe, where a lot of the and not in every country in Europe, and obviously not every family, but a lot of, like you say, a lot of families go through that. Like you will live in your parents' house, and I actually, funnily enough, my gardener lives in his wife's parents' house, and their grandparents used to own it in my village. So that is the only time I've heard that happen where I live
Yeah,
now, which is fascinating. But it's true, we don't look at houses necessarily for the longevity. I mean, normally, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is much more your area, people will move into a house and they go, I'm not moving again. That was so stressful. I'm not doing it for another 10 years. And that will be kind of like a short amount of time, really, compared to it, rather than I'm going to live here, unless you're kind of getting to that point in life where you want somewhere to retire to and spend the rest of your days. But we
Yeah,
don't see ourselves in that same way anymore, do we?
no, yeah, it's, and I think we're always in this country, particularly, we want to make money out of property. That's also part of the problem. That whereas I think ideally you should be making a home and doing the proper long-term things. I think Homes Under the Hammer has got a lot to answer for, really, and a lot of it isn't true. And some of the prices I see on there, I'm like, no way have they done it for that. It's just, yeah. So anyway, but so I'd rather, and my objection I have to that as well is that if you're doing something to flip a house, you're not doing it for the end consumer because you don't know who the end consumer is. So straight away there's waste because person B comes in and rips it all out, starts again anyway. And C, you're doing it to just make it superficially look good so that someone buys it and then they move in and discover all the bodge jobs and the fact that it still costs an arm and a leg to heat it and all sorts of things. And my biggest bone of contention is the blimmin' major house builders who build a red brick box times a gazillion on the edge of every single town, wherever you go, Northampton, Southampton, wherever. And they're only meant to last 50 years and they're not built well. The snagging lists are enormous. They've got small windows because that's cheap. And then the first thing people do is they move in, stick a conservatory on the back because they want more light. But of course, it's either too hot or too cold, so that's inefficient. When they could have just built it right in the first place, and it doesn't need to cost very much. So that's what I wrote about in my first book. Was that?
Wow. I was going to talk about, because you've written books before, but I really want to talk about the fact that what I mentioned in the introduction is that you wanted a business that worked around you, not the other way around, which obviously in principle sounds wonderful. I know isn't always the case, particularly in the world of architecture, where sometimes you are run by projects. But I think it's really interesting because so many people want to have a business when they us in the entrepreneurial world want a business that works for us rather than the other way around. We often think about that. Often the reality doesn't come for that. But I mean, your knowledge of architecture is incredible, but you don't just work with architects, though, do you? You work with more people. So how do you start? Because you're a huge amount of business knowledge, huge amount of process as well. How do you start thinking about what people need in their lives? Because you do that in your homes. How do you do that and replicate that in business?
Um, I think it's all tied up in this story, which is how I set up my remote team. Was that I did some blogging in 2014, and then that led to too much work, and I was forced to take on an employee, which I didn't want to do because I thought I'd be a really grumpy boss. And yeah, and I didn't want to manage people because I didn't think I'm not a people person. I like people, but I don't want to manage them. And anyway, but I was teaching at the time at Oxford Brookes Uni, so I had access to really good students, and I thought I'll just try it. The alternative was letting down lots of clients. And anyway, long story short, it turned out really well. Um, but at the time, I thought I can't expect a student to drive out to me in the countryside. They might not even have a car, and I don't want to set up an office that I'll only sit in 2 days a week, maximum, because I'm always on site. Yeah, and I'll be paying a big overhead for something I'm like trying out anyway. So I just tagged on a meeting um, after my teaching day with my student employee, and that worked. And then when she moved to Australia, I replaced her with two people, and so it just kind of naturally grew over that. So that's kind of an example of where, like, everybody. I was tweeting about this at the time, um, and I was interviewed for the architecture press about it and stuff, and I got lots of feedback saying, how do you trust your employees when they're working from home and you can't see them? And be, oh, if you're in architecture, you always need to be open for collaboration because you never know when the ideas are going to come up. And I'm like, oh, for God's sake, this is just bonkers. And
Wow.
I had all this pressure from the outside saying you should do it the traditional way, which is set up an office and everybody comes there every single day and you grow from that. I was like, but why? Why do you need to do it like that? Um, so I'd give that as like a really good example of just going from what you need. And then this was way before COVID, so we were well set up for that. But also, I mean, I didn't have kids then, but I did really enjoy the freedom of being able to go for a swim in the afternoon and not just, sitting at my desk just because I felt like I had to. Um, and then when I later had my son, I couldn't take maternity leave because I had a young team to support. And in any case, mat pay doesn't pay your bills, not even slightly. It's less than the minimum wage by a huge degree. It's, yeah, anyway, how people do it, I don't know. But so I carried on working after 3 weeks with him attached to me. And but I could do that because I was working from home and my team came to me for a while because I found it hard to get out. Um, and I have lots of parents working for me now because it means they can go get to school pickup, they can go and watch the Harvest Festival or whatever. It just works. And I think the rest of the world are kind of missing out on these hugely talented people just because of an arbitrary 9 to 5 commitment that somebody made up a long time ago and nobody's questioned since.
Well,
Bit
yes,
strange.
well, I mean, it's an interesting history behind the 9 to 5, which I'm going to have to wrap up this podcast shortly, but it didn't start with Henry Ford, but he was the one that made it a standard thing because he wanted a workforce that could design cars in a 9 to 5 environment, although it wasn't 9 to 5 at the time, but that was how it ended up becoming the working week. So that was
Ah,
how, but there was more history to it than that. But actually, a couple of the things that really interest me in that is the fact that one, people were tweeting saying back in the days of tweeting, which was a lovely time. I used to love tweeting, which I don't so
yeah,
much anymore. The lack of trust in the industry, like I can't see
yeah,
them. So why can't you just trust that people actually do want to do a good job and actually
yeah,
want to enjoy their
exactly.
work?
Yeah,
And that's just such a core inherence of the environments that people were working in. Like,
yeah,
why is it wrong to go to work and enjoy yourself? Like, it shouldn't have to be either or. It can be
no,
both. And that was one of the things I always used to find really difficult about some of the work environments. I'm like, I don't want my team to come to work for me and hate their jobs. If that's the
yeah,
case, they're not going to do a good job. And that's not the
yeah,
environment I want. And also, what I really love about you is you kind of ask why. Why do we do that? Something as children we ask a lot. I mean, children, as I remember being really annoying asking the question why all the time. But then at some point between like child, teenage years, and adults, we stopped questioning the world. And I think it was a really interesting one. And this might go back to your art degree. It certainly was for mine because I went to a music college that really questioned what art was. I'm not going to get into that whole debate now because there isn't an argument that you can end on to that. But it really challenged your mind in how you people saw the world and how subjective it is. And
yeah,
there are so many ways to do things. There is not one path. It's about finding that right way, which in some ways summarizes how you do business anyway, because you come in and you give people the art of possibility and you don't always see things in the way, like you say, your dogs are going to get the best view rather than you. Who would you rather spend the money on? And I
yeah,
love that. I think it just sums up you in a really clear way. And you work with a lot of service-based businesses as well, don't you? Because you, like I say, you have so much knowledge and understanding the whole aspect of business, even though you've got that knowledge of architecture, but understanding how to grow that team and make something work for you and build a business that works for not just you, but your clients and your teams and everything. So that's why you kind of have gone into helping more than just the architectural world, because you can see the design of how people can work better.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I did after I wrote my second book. which was about how I built my business, all the mistakes I've made, but basically kind of how to be an architect and still have a life kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, but yeah, I got such good feedback from that, and then that led to mentoring different businesses, mainly architects at first, but it's widened out now to all service-based businesses because we've all got the same problems, all of us. And it's so nice to see everybody overcoming problems together. Because I run a group program once a month, and we all support each other. And then it's really good. Like it kind of doesn't feel like anything's happening. Then all of a sudden, like people are winning more work, their cash flows are smoothing out, and they've been able to raise their prices without feeling bad about it. All sorts of things like pop up, and or they're moving into different areas. They're setting up new businesses. It's just brilliant to watch. And it's nice to be able to challenge them. Like, you don't have to do it this way just because everybody else does it like that. Yeah, I'm proof. I'm proof it works.
I'm going to end it on that note because just because someone does it doesn't mean you have to do it. I love that. Claire, where can people find you if they want to connect and find out more about you?
So my architecture website is clarenasharchitecture.co.uk. My mentoring site is clarenash.co.uk. Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, uh, which I'm easy to find. Like, I'm the only architect called Clare Nash, so you can find me.
Amazing. You're famous. Brilliant. I'll pop all of these in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of Stories That Sell. And I will be back again next week. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.